As the expressionist movement and silent film itself came creeping to an end, Universal Studios hired German director Paul Laney to finally put together one of their long-gestated pictures, an adaptation of the novel The Man Who Laughs. What resulted was a cult classic that stands amongst the best of the decade, with an unexpected influence on the next century of pop culture. The Man Who Laughs is a tragic romance tale, framed and perceived as a horror through its persistent downbeat atmosphere and visually terrifying lead actor. The author of the novel, Victor Hugo from France, is one of the most celebrated literary figures of the 19th century, though The Man Who Laughs is considered controversial and among his lesser works. Despite this, there were already 2 prior adaptations of the novel, and many since, with a version releasing as late as 2012. Victor Hugo is of course more well known for writing Les Mis and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the latter of which was adapted into a hugely profitable film by Universal Studios, starring Lon Chaney. Eager to ride their own coattails, the studio heads clamoured to adapt The Man Who Laughs, but struggled with obtaining the rights. A few years later, the legal issues were ironed out, and the film was ready to go ahead, minus Chaney, who was originally attached to star. Instead, the lead role of the deformed clown Gwynplaine went to German icon Conrad Veidt. Paul Laney was brought in as director after doing a good job for Universal Studios with The Cat and the Canary, and he and Conrad had already worked together on the film Waxworks. Thus, the stage was set, and the producers had a good feeling about the project, so they poured over $1 million into the production. Quite unheard of at the time. The film begins in 17th century England, under the rule of King James II. In the opening few minutes, the dour, gruesome mood of the film already settles in and rarely shifts. The king orders a rival of his, one Lord Clancharlie, to be executed via the particularly nasty method of the Iron Lady. But there is a snivelling right-hand man poisoning the ears of the king, a prototype for Wormtongue in The Lord of the Rings, and Bargain Bucket Wormtongue in The Hobbit. He makes sure to inform the Doom Lord first, but they have taken his little boy and cut his mouth into a permanent grin. Fucking hell. As if that isn't bad enough, the surgeons who perform such deeds are rightly banished from the country, but this leads to the young deformed child Gwynplaine to be abandoned in the cold night. The child wanders alone until he finds a woman holding a little baby. But the woman is dead, and the baby is chilly and alone. Fucking hell. Then there is a montage of shadowy, hanging corpses in the wind. Fucking hell. A light at the end of the tunnel. Gwynplaine and the baby are taken in by the first nice adult in the film, but he finds out the baby is blind. Fucking hell. As the years pass, the trio becomes a family/business. The man partakes as a freak show host, with Gwynplaine as the star attraction, the laughing man, and the baby has grown up to be dear, beautiful but blind. A strong romantic bond lies between the two, but Gwynplaine feels it is almost unfair on the girl, as she doesn't understand the extent of his ruined image. Everyone else he ever meets laughs and taunts him. The psychological effects of his life are clear and heartbreaking, the scary image giving way to real empathy. Without going into too much detail or spoilers, the story grows more complicated as their travelling freak show garners more and more attention, and the group ends up entangled with the royal family, the government, and a sexed-up duchess. All the while, the truth of the laughing man's heritage threatens to be revealed. This film has it all. Horrifying imagery, terribly dark subject matter, real heartfelt romance, love triangle guilt, eroticism, butt shots, swashbuckling action, tragedy, redemption, sticking your finger up to the man, a nice cheering moment involving a dog ripping out the throat of a dickhead. Finally, after getting such blue balls from 1925's Wolf Blood. There are moments of comedy here and there, and they are mainly at the expense of the lords and aristocrats, pompous, bug-eyed weirdos, including Weird Al's dodgy granddad. The author Victor Hugo was no fan of the establishment, so that is to be expected. Likewise, he was big on brothels, so that explains the Royal Duchess of Butt. But yes, the gloomy tone is masterfully constructed and dominates the film. Mixing the director's German expressionist roots with the simpler romanticized Hollywood style of horror that would prevail into the 30s, the film acts as a transitional piece. Likewise, it feels that way in terms of sound. The film was initially released in April of 1927 as a purely silent film, but was swiftly recalled with the imminent threat of the jazz singer on the horizon. Warner Brothers released the jazz singer just a few months later, as the first feature film to have synchronized sound, changing cinema forever. Universal quickly set to work adapting the film for sound. The new version released a year later in April 1928, complete with a fully synchronized score, including a love song halfway through the film. Some sound effects were also added to strong effect at key moments. Sounds of howling, taunting clouds. Most of the film, barring the score, is still silent, so these jeers really stand out and hammer home the bullied emotions that Gwynplaine suffers day in, day out. Fortunately for the studio, the stupendous budget can be plainly seen on the screen. It stands tall and proud over other studios' smaller, enclosed, claustrophobic horror and mystery pieces. The talent involved, of course, came at a price, with Conrad Veidt strongly playing the type as a tragic, misunderstood outcast, with the world's most emotive forehead. Even with half of his face held in place by dense makeup, fake dentures, and hooks to keep his mouth twisted up in a hideous grin, the actor delivers both the emotional heavy lifting and genuinely scary elements required of the performance. Acting alongside him is Mary Philbin, fresh of her remarkable lead role as Christine Daae in The Phantom of the Opera. The talented cast inhabit a large variety of unique sets, from royal halls to old-timey city centres to boats, showing off their production values at every given moment. A metric fuck-ton of extras are used constantly, alongside a cast of animals, from elephants and violent monkeys to spooky birds and an unfortunately named dog. The Man Who Laughs has garnered further acclaim over the years after initially average reviews, which found the film too grim and depressing. Eventually, it has become a mainstay in audiences' favourites of the 1920s decade. A big factor in keeping the film's interest alive is the connection to one of the most iconic villains in pop culture history, Batman's nemesis, the Joker. The creators of Batman are not ashamed to admit they borrowed the Clown Prince of Darkness's look for the character's introduction in 1940. Further down the line, later creators of Batman content have tipped their hat to the Joker's origins and initial inspiration, naming a one-shot 2005 comic in very direct fashion, Batman, the Man Who Laughs. A spooky character named the Batman Who Laughs, a disturbing hybrid between both Batman and the Joker, was introduced recently in 2017. The image of Conrad Veidt's misunderstood monster is iconic in its own right, though. Alone, it stands as a truly unsettling image, but in context, our unease soon falls away to pity and understanding as the film crafts a superb tale of romance and personal growth behind the furnishings of a gloomy horror picture.